How's it going today, guys? In today's episode, I'm going to be talking about my second trip that I made to Puerto Rico. And this is probably going to be a 5 or 6 episode series at least, so I'm just going to start from the beginning, seeing that this is part one. It was a pretty interesting adventure this time around. I remember me and my buddies landing in San Juan and leaving the San Juan airport, and we found an Airbnb for the night, and we were deciding what we were going to do next. And right when I got to the Airbnb and I started walking around a couple neighborhoods in San Juan, I was immediately reminded about how hot and humid the island can actually be. And it's always hard for my body to adapt to different climates like that. I just started getting used to the wintertime in Washington State, and then suddenly I'm on the island. And I know when I go to Puerto Rico, the first couple weeks or so, I'm susceptible to getting sick now just because of the climate change. And what I'm going to do during my next trip to rectify that is I'm going to build my immune system up before I go. And I'm going to bring a lot of vitamin C packets with me just to make sure my immune system's in tip-top shape when I get there. So maybe it'll alleviate some of that a little bit. And something else that's interesting about being on the island is you can only plan so far ahead because anything can happen. And I learned that again, or was reminded of it again, literally the first day back on the island. It turns out me and my friends were hanging out at our Airbnb that night, and we got a hold of our buddies from the Earthship, and they happened to be on our side of the island doing some things, and they were getting ready to leave to go back to the Earthship. So we decided to just catch a ride with them. So within the first 24 hours of being on the island, my plans completely changed because suddenly I'm at the Earthship when I didn't plan on being there for another month or so. But I was happy to be there, and it actually worked out great. I spent a couple weeks there just adapting to the climate and doing chores and helping clean the Earthship up and get it ready for the concert that was going to be thrown within a week or two from me showing up there. And I just got a little stir crazy though after a few weeks. So I knew my buddies were planning a trip to Lares, Puerto Rico, because they wanted to look at this old abandoned hotel, which I was ecstatic about because you guys know me, I love history and old abandoned things and cemeteries and stuff like that. So it was right up my alley. So we went to Lares and we went and checked it out, and you could find it on my YouTube channel somewhere if you look around deeply enough. And we went and ate at a little place in San Sebastian on the way back home. And after we got done eating, I said my goodbyes to them and told my friends that I'd be back in a couple days, that I was just ready to go on a little adventure. And so they took off and went back to the Earthship in Aguada, and I stayed behind in San Sebastian. And I found the plaza, and I found the bench that I knew I was going to sleep on that night. It was almost Christmas time, so I wanted to get a couple cemeteries in before the Christmas season and the New Year's season had me trapped for a while, which I knew it was coming. But anyways, the plaza in San Sebastian had all these awesome Christmas lights up and decorations, and I mean, they really did a good job making the area look nice. And there were happy families walking around everywhere, and people were smiling, and a big parade took place that was just random. I had no idea what it was for or what it was about, and I still don't to this day, but I remember the energy being really good. And I was sitting there on that bench thinking that there's be no better place on the island than this place right now tonight to be the first night that I'm out on an adventure again in Puerto Rico. Until, of course, the rain hit. Because what you wouldn't know if you haven't been to Puerto Rico before, and I mean, I knew, but I didn't experience it ever like I experienced it this night. There was a lot of rain in the mountainous areas of the island, and San Sebastian and Lares, they're kind of up there, they're higher up than a lot of towns and cities on the island, and they get a lot of rain. So I got just pelted with rain. I ended up laying under the bench for a while until there was so much rain that the plaza ground was just completely wet, and I couldn't stay on the ground anymore and not get wet, even under the bench. So I found myself standing over any kind of rooftop cover I could find, and that wasn't working. And I was getting pretty wet. My feet were completely soaked, and I got almost no sleep. But luckily, they had a Burger King in the area that actually opened up at like 5 in the morning. So I ran in that Burger King as quick as I could and tried to dry off as much as possible. And I charged my phone and my battery and got a cup of coffee and waited for the sunrise to come. So I finished up my cup of coffee at the Burger King and let my phone charge a little bit, and I left right before sunrise. And luckily it stopped raining really hard. It would drizzle a little bit here and there, but I had my poncho on just in case, because I'm telling you guys, it was that bad that night. And so I found myself walking around in the neighborhoods of San Sebastian, just waiting for the sun to come up. And I decided to walk by one of the 2 cemeteries that I wanted to photograph and film that day, or over the next couple days, however long it took. And as I was walking by the old cemetery in San Sebastian, I realized it looked, for all intents and purposes, abandoned, and there was no lock on the gate, and the gate was kind of open. Not completely open, but it wasn't completely closed. And at that point, the sun started coming out, so I just made the decision just to go in there and film it and photograph it, which was great because I got some really interesting and unique shots of the cemetery just because it was, the sun was coming out and it just got done raining really hard. So it just made for really unique photos. And that to this day is one of the best photo shoots I've ever taken, I think, of a cemetery on the island. So I got done with that pretty quick because it wasn't a big cemetery by any means, and that invigorated me right away. Even though I didn't get any sleep the night before and I was pretty tired, my spirits were really high. And so I decided to just try to get both of the cemeteries done that day because it wasn't even 8 in the morning yet, and I already had one cemetery completely filmed and photographed. So I walked across town and up this treacherous hill with these little tiny narrow roads, and I was walking in the ditches basically trying to get up to the next cemetery there in San Sebastian. And I finally made it, and I talked to the lady that was in charge at the office that was running it, and she said, yeah, she didn't mind that I went in there and filmed it and took photographs. So I spent about 4.5 hours in this cemetery because the Municipal Cemetery in San Sebastian, it's a big cemetery, and you can go find episodes on it in my YouTube channel if you go back and look deep enough. But anyways, I got done filming the cemetery, and by the time I was leaving the cemetery and made it back to the middle of the town in San German, and I was thinking about walking to Lares, I realized that it would be nightfall soon, and I definitely don't like walking at night because the roads are too narrow on the island. So I knew I was going to have to stay another night in San Sebastian. So I went to a random pizza place, a local pizza place, and had a really good pizza and a soda, which is a guilty pleasure of mine on the island, and charged my phone up a little bit. And then another huge rainstorm hit, just a huge rainstorm. And I had no interest in getting soaked and sitting outside for another night and not getting any sleep, especially when I had the long walk to Lares ahead of me. So I decided to break down and get an Airbnb, and it was part of me just being more prepared this time. I saved a little bit more money on this second trip for when I have an emergency. I could do things like get an Airbnb. And so I got a really nice little Airbnb there in San Sebastian and went and laid down on that bed and slept for 10 hours like a baby, because I knew that next morning I had to get up bright and early and march to Lares, and I didn't know what was going to be in store for me. So I ended up sleeping in a little bit that next morning because I honestly wasn't feeling too well. It was during that first trip that I finally got the cold, or, that sickness that I always get when I go on these long vacations sometime during that first month. And it seems like to me now, it's usually about the third week that I'm on the island, I get that cold. And then once that's done with, I'm perfectly healthy after that point. So I started feeling it that evening and the next morning as I was getting ready to leave that Airbnb. And I wanted to leave early in the morning at like 6, but I ended up not getting out of there until about 10. And the walk to Lares was pretty rough because it's mostly uphill. And like I said, the roads are really narrow, so you got to pay attention a lot. And the roads are busy too, not just really narrow, but really busy. So I had to be on my A game and pay attention. And I had a heavy bag on my back, so I had a good day of marching. I left at about 10 and I didn't get to Lares until about 4:30. And by that time, the cemetery was wrapping up and getting ready to close. And so I knew I couldn't film the cemetery that day. And like I said in a previous episode, one of the things that really slows me down on these walks that I go on is not only the cemeteries usually being closed on the weekends, so that's 2 extra days that I could be stuck in one town because I don't want to miss the cemetery there, but also not walking at night. Because I try to limit my night walking a lot, that only leaves me a certain amount of time to film a cemetery and to walk. So normally I don't mind walking 25 to 35 miles a day, but when I have so much to do, and then walking across town to find a Burger King to plug in my phone, and then walking across town again to find a plaza to sleep on the bench, or walking across town again to get to the Airbnb that I got. All this extra stuff takes a lot of time and a lot of extra walking. So my progression gets really hampered by a lot of situations, which it just is what it is. It's all a cost of doing business, but it definitely slows me down. So I made it to Lares, and it was too late to film and photograph the cemetery, and I still just wasn't feeling very good. I knew I was getting over the crud, so I just broke down and got an Airbnb in Lares that night too, and I barely touched my dinner, and I just slept as much as I could and took a couple of showers. And I knew I had a really long day ahead of me the next day because I wanted to get up and film and photograph the cemetery in Lares, but I also wanted to make it back at least to San Sebastian before it got dark. So I just tried to relax and get as much sleep as possible. And I was really grateful that I was more prepared this time during my second trip, because if I would have ran into something like this during my first trip, I would have just been stuck outside and not feeling good, and it really would have been miserable. So that's the beauty of having experience and learning from your mistakes. So I got up and I got ready that next morning, and I made a couple peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I had my appetite back, so I knew I was starting to feel better. And I looked out my window and it was raining, but not super hard, so I decided just to go for it. And I went to the Laurez Cemetery, and I spent a number of hours, 3 or 4 hours probably, just walking up and down each of the rows and taking pictures and making videos. And every 20, 25 minutes or so, I'd have to stop and go sit under a tree because it would just start raining too hard. And that was okay. I still got the job done. I ended up making a couple friends. I talked to a couple people there and told them what I was doing, and everybody seemed pretty okay with me being there and walking around. And although by everybody, I mean the 3 people that I saw in the cemetery, it was pretty empty, like most of the cemeteries usually are, and especially during a rainy day. And I didn't want to stay in Laurez again, so I decided just to take the risk, even though it was a little rainy out, just to take the risk and try to make it back to San Sebastian, even though it's like a 5 or 6 hour walk. And about halfway back to San Sebastian, that's when I realized I made a big mistake, because it started raining and pouring, and even my phone got wet to the point to where I couldn't really operate it. And I ended up walking down the wrong road, and then I got stuck and lost for a minute, and it was really awesome. My bag got soaked, I was soaked. Something that I didn't consider is having a bag that needs a poncho and me needing a poncho. That means I need 2 ponchos and I only had one. And making a rash decision, I decided to cover myself with the poncho instead of my bag, which in retrospect, I would have rather covered my bag, because while I was only 20% soaked, my bag got soaked during that walk from Laurez to San Sebastian. And all of my no-name exploration business cards got soaked. A bunch of my clothes got soaked. And even though I had rain gear on over me, I had a really nice poncho on. It didn't stop my legs and my feet from just getting absolutely soaked. So when I made it back to San Sebastian, it was still raining and pouring. And so I was like, dang it, I'm going to have to get an Airbnb again. That's 3 Airbnbs on one little walk. So I knew I was already behind the 8 ball, but I also knew I wasn't going to get sick again. And a lot of places that I was going to go in the future wasn't going to be so rainy. So I knew I was still okay. Even though I was a little caught off guard, I won't lie that I had to get 3 Airbnbs just on one little walk. But I got the Airbnb, and I went and I got a pizza and some coffee, and I just hung up all my clothes in that room and let them dry as best they could. And I passed out and got another good 8 hours of sleep. But again, I knew I had a long day ahead of me the next day, because I had plans of just making it back to the Earthship in Aguada from San Sebastian. I was just going to do the whole walk that next day. And so I knew I had a long journey ahead of me. So I got up really early that next morning, before the birds even started chirping. and it was still dark out, and I was out the door because I knew I had a lot of walking ahead of me. And I finally made it to Mocha, Puerto Rico from San Sebastian. And that was my first regret of my second trip, was not going back to the Mocha Cemetery that I went to during my first trip and refilming and photographing it, since I got a newer, much higher quality camera. But I got lazy and just walked past Mocha, really, and continued to head towards Aguada. And I like to highlight my regrets because I learn from them the most, and it'll help me make better decisions on my third trip when I go back to the island of Puerto Rico, because I would like to visit Mocha again and rephotograph it, since I didn't during my second trip. And so anyways, I walked and walked, and I finally made it to Aguada and was heading up the highway to make it to the Earthship, because the Earthship's kind of nestled there in between Aguada and Rincon and Mayaguez. It's up in that area. So making it to Aguada wasn't the objective. I had to go past Aguada and into the jungle to make it to the Earthship. And I walked and walked and walked, and I'm walking down the freeway, and I received my first act of kindness from a stranger during my second trip. Some lady pulled over on the side of the road and offered me a ride, and I told her, no, I can't take rides. I have to finish my walk. But I really appreciated her stopping for me, and she offered to give me $20. And what I do now when people give me money on the streets, even though I don't need it, I just take it because I don't want to say no and disrespect them. If it's what they want to do with their money, it's what they want to do with their money. It's none of my business. So I took the $20. I told her thank you very much, and I told her about the Earthship and that she should go see it someday, because anybody that's on the island of Puerto Rico should go see the Earthship, because it's one of the coolest things on the island. But anyways, I kept walking, and a couple hours later, I was almost to the Earthship. And I remember the final steps to making it to the Earthship, how brutal it is. I laugh about it to this day, kind of just a funny story. During the last leg of the walk to the Earthship, you got to go up this really steep, long hill. And I had this big bag on my back that probably weighs 48 to 55 pounds, and I've been walking all day. And I was just slowly marching up that hill. And then at one point, I just would walk up the hill 20, 30 steps and then just plop down on my butt and lay down. And then I'd pull myself back up and march up that hill 20 or 30 steps and then plop back down with my bag. And I didn't realize a group of people were sitting outside of their house watching me do this. And, I'm making expressions and grunting and whining and blah, 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 blah. And then I look over and there's a whole family of people looking at me. And I was like, damn, I look really stupid right now. But anyways, by the end of it, I finally made it to the top of the hill and down the street. And I was finally back at the Earthship. I limped into the Earthship, and I'd never have been happier in my life to arrive somewhere. Besides maybe when I made it to Michael Morales's place, when I walked from San Juan to Aguada the previous year. But I finally made it back to the Earthship, and I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and just relaxed. And I was sore and beat up and hurting. And my bag was soaked, and it was great. It was a great first adventure to get me back into the groove of what was to come during this second trip, because this second trip was just as eventful, if not more eventful, than the first trip. And I have a lot more stories to share with you guys about my second trip. So stay tuned. Thanks for listening.